So I'm finishing off these orphan blocks this year. Whether I do it right now or do it later, I've got to get it done. So I've got all these blue ones and blue and yellow and all of those pieces of strips. I took the blue and white ones, put them in an X formation, added some solid blue on the sides to make a more distinct X. And I think I'm not going to use those interesting orphan blocks in the middle. I'm going to use all of these chunks of strips sewn together and just create big blocks that are going to fit in to the sizes of the blocks that I've created. The 5 biggest blocks are 13 inches and the smaller blue and white triangles are 9.5 inches. So I have to be a little bit careful when I'm cutting things out so they are going to fit together. It's kind of tricky doing that, but it's not insurmountable. So when I'm making the squares using the triangles, I'm doing it just like a half square triangle. So it's relatively easy. You take 2 pieces of fabric the same size, draw a diagonal, sew down the side. And it works very easily, even with these pieces that I'm using to with the big strips. It's the same thing. You can cut them and then sew them and then trim them up. But basically, it's a half square triangle. Both pieces are the same size and they're the same shape. So it's just a bigger size. And when I square them up to fit the 9.5 inch blocks that have the smaller triangles on them. So it's easy to square up a square because you just use the diagonal of the ruler and make it the size you want. In this case, I want 9.5 inches. Okay, when you square up a square, things are relatively easy. You have lines to go by to make it square and a diagonal. That is going to be a perfect square. But when you have a rectangle like this and you are sewing a diagonal on there, it's not as easy as it seems. I've had my struggle putting these two together because I just made random strips of fabric joined together. And I looked at it on my tabletop here so that I had at least 13.5 inches, 13.5 inches, and 9.5 inches this way. But I found that if I just sew them together along this diagonal here, the pieces here do not meet in the corner. They're above the corner when I'm trying to match it up on the wall with the other pieces. So I have to be a bit more specific about the pieces I am cutting here and the pieces I am cutting here. So what I've been doing is putting one on top of the other, like that, right sides up. And I want 13.5 plus a seam allowance here. And here I want 9.5 with a seam allowance there. So I'm doing a little extra trimming off of here. I have to make sure though that these two are going to be, if I need to trim them off, I can trim them off, but I need to have the angle correct. So I need to also just move it down and over a bit for this to work. It's a bit of trial and error, and it's a little bit risky, I think. But let's see how it works. Wipe that off there. So when I'm going to sew this together, turn this around. This is going to go on there. And hopefully when I sew that, press it, come back, it's going to be the rectangle of my dreams. Let me see how it goes. I'm going to sew it now. I always try to sew with the stripy side to the top so I can keep the lines all pressed in the correct order. All right, let's see how it goes. The one thing about sewing on a diagonal like this is don't stretch. Don't take the corners and tug them and pull them because they will twist and curve. All right, now I will press it and then I'll see how it goes. Also, when I press these, since all those seam allowances are on that side, I just press them all to one side underneath. They lie flatter that way. Now, let's see how it goes. Put it down on my table with the right angle. Both of these come to the corner. Not bad. I move it up to the 1 inch mark so I can see the line. This 13.5 is still 13.5. I use the measurement at the bottom of the table and the measurement at the top of the table, cutting board, to make sure that it's correct. That's a nice straight line, so this one can get trimmed like so. Now I just need to do these two sides, and I want them 9.5. That one is straight. This one is 9.5 there and there. So that would make my point off the corner. So I don't really want to do it there, so I'm going to go closer to this end. Take a little bit off of that side. Turn it around. And take a little bit off of this side. And look at that. The points are perfect. Remember which way it goes. So always remember when you're doing something that is a half square, it's easy to line it up and get a diagonal so that the points are in the corner. But doing a rectangle, you have to be a bit more careful about the placement of the seam and the seam allowances. I have 1, 2, 3 more of those to do, and a couple more squares to do, but I'm just sewing this together now. It's working really well. I kind of like the way it's going. I like all these random bright colors contrasting with the cool blues in that diagonal that's forming. Okay. See how it goes. I'll finish putting it together now. I finished sewing all of the pieces together, and I'm very happy with the X, and it's not quite as straight as I would hope it would be, but it's pretty good, and I think it looks really quite nice. And I really do like all of those random strips of colorful fabric in the V's of that X part. And nice. But it is a square quilt, and I still have quite a few orphan blocks left. So what I'm going to do is make a 9 patch on the back side of the quilt for the backing and use up some of those extra bits, make squares using the orphan blocks and just sew them together in a big 9 patch. And I am going to get rid of all of those, all of those, all of those geese sooner or later.